I'm Brooks Melchior, and this is Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We do it every Monday through Friday, noon Eastern time on the Fancred app. Glad you're here. We're going to talk NFL as we almost always do on this show, and we've got a great guest coming up. One of my favorite guys on Twitter, someone you should definitely follow on Twitter. His name is Doug Farrar, and he's with USA Today. He's at NFL_Doug Farrar, Farrar. Tremendous guy to follow. NFL USA Today Sports, author of a cool book called The Genius of Desperation, which I want to talk to him about. Great title that he wrote with Louis Riddick, of course, who is the man at ESPN, everybody's favorite analyst at ESPN. So we're going to have Doug on to talk NFL and probably going to talk about Kaepernick because I'm just going to beat that horse. I'm going to beat that dead horse today. Sorry. No, it's not a dead horse. There's some new information that's come out about him in the last 24 hours, Colin Kaepernick, that's relevant to the NFL and what's going on, what's happening on the field right now. So we're going to talk about that. If we get to it, we probably will. And we'll also talk about what's going on with the NBA and China. And it's something that I've been all over on Twitter the last few days, kind of leading the pack on it, if you will, to a certain extent. I'd like to think I am. This morning, I joined Daniel Roberts, sports business guy at Yahoo Finance, on his streaming show, which was a lot of fun. And we primarily talked about Daryl Morey. What had happened was Daniel asked me on the show because of some tweets that I sent out this morning about Daryl Morey, who I've thought a lot about. And, of course, it's Daryl Morey's tweet that I'm not going to say caused the big explosion in China because it didn't necessarily do that. For all we know, the reaction of his owner, Tillman Fertitta, throwing him under the bus forcefully on Twitter, then Morey deleting the tweet, then later the NBA coming out with this Chinese language press release that pandered to the Chinese government and threw Morey under the bus, something that everybody conveniently forgets about as we're now lauding Adam Silver for his courage, for defending Morey's basic rights in Japan, I might add. That's where he made those remarks on Wednesday, saying that Daryl Morey, of course, has freedom of speech and expression, and we support that. Wow. Okay. But at the beginning, the NBA threw Morey under the bus. Fertitta, his owner, did. Joe Tsai, the owner of the Brooklyn Nets, did. And James Harden, his own player, did, with Harden's pitiful apology. And so Daryl Morey very much is on an island right now. And news report comes out today that stores in China, actually Nike stores in China, are pulling Rockets gear, not NBA gear, Rockets gear. Now, I just got that news. That came out today. And this comes on developments yesterday that I'm sure you don't know about. But the Chinese government, as reported by the New York Times, is now telling its mouthpieces in Chinese state-run media, which is the whole country's media, I might add. They have things like the South China Morning Post, right? These things, the Global Times, they appear not to be state-run media. They very much are state-run media. And so the New York Times reports that the Chinese government now telling its journalists to call off the dogs. And that's been all but confirmed. And I've seen indications of that in my 24/7 coverage of what's going on in China with the press and the media. Right. So that's taking place. But then we get this new report from Reuters that Nike is, and by the way, remember Nike's Colin Kaepernick ad campaign, right? Think about that. Fighting for what you believe in. You're willing to risk everything. And look at what they're doing. They're throwing the Rockets under the bus. and well, essentially Daryl Morey. That's what it is. So so that came out this afternoon, and but this morning I went on a long tweet rant, or whatever. It wasn't really a rant, a stream of consciousness on Twitter, where I kind of laid out my thoughts on Daryl Morey, who I think is in now an impossible position. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I think we're at the point now with him, the general manager of the Rockets since 2006. He is one of the genius GMs, if you don't know, of the NBA. And he's the architect of James Harden, Russell Westbrook, which for my money is probably the team I want to watch more than any team this year in the NBA, including the Clippers and the Lakers, right? At Daryl Morey. So he's a very, 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 very high-profile guy in the NBA, especially in terms of front offices. All right? So he's completely on an island. And let me give you the best example I've seen. And I just tweeted it. And this is video that I want to run at some point so you guys can see it, hear it. I'm going to try to put it on my Twitter when I get a chance. But Steve Kerr spoke to the media again yesterday. You know who that is, the coach of the Warriors. And this time he went on and on. Well, do you have the part, Cam Smith, our producer in Boston? Cam, do you have the part? What I want to talk about is this issue with the soundbite. That's the first thing I'm going to bring up. I think it's a different clip. So let me read this, because I don't think that's the clip you have. Or do you have the clip where he's asked about Daryl Morey? So I think we have, yeah. So we'll get to that other clip here shortly. That's going to be the next thing. But so Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors, was asked about Daryl Morey by a media member yesterday. All right. And I'm going to read the exchange for you right here. This is the reporter yesterday asking Steve Kerr a question. Quote, understanding that you don't want to comment on something outside the United States, are you broadly supportive of NBA officials being able to do so? Specifically, do you believe Daryl Morey shouldn't be fired over something like this? That's the operative sentence. Specifically, do you believe Daryl Morey shouldn't be fired over something like this? That's to Steve Kerr. Now here's Kerr's response. Quote, I appreciate the fact you have to ask me something like this. I get it. But I'd hope you'd appreciate my right to not answer that question, because all it does is create a headline and a soundbite. I choose not to be a soundbite tonight. Oh, is this a day-to-day thing? Like tomorrow you're going to do it? And then he finished it up with, probably too late for that tonight. I choose not to be that soundbite. All the guy asked you was, do you believe Daryl Morey, Houston GM, shouldn't be fired over something like this? And his response, I'd hope you'd appreciate my right not to answer that question. Steve Kerr, the guy who isn't shy about, and he wasn't in this press conference, holding forth about a lot of things, but not about the status of Daryl Morey. You've got to be kidding me. You have to be kidding me that he couldn't just answer. I mean, it was a weird question, because the question was, do you believe Daryl Morey shouldn't be fired over something like this? And the answer to that is yes, he should not be fired. Right? So that is the easy answer. One word. That's all he had to say. One word. Couldn't do it. Couldn't say it. Right? And to me, right there, as you assess, you try to make sense of this whole thing, but really Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich, these two guys who go on and on and on and on about the government, Trump, and a lot of people are on their side. And I feel the same way about a lot of the things that he says about in general, right? But he can't answer that. He can't answer that question. That's embarrassing. And I think that underlines just how sensitive the situation is and how spooked the NBA is about Daryl Morey, specifically in the context of the Chinese government. And this is the thing. And I discovered that. I mined that out of his comments, going over them as I was prepping for the show, right? Steve Kerr's press conference, it was all over Twitter, the video, some of the text, but I had to go through all of it. And then, wow, haven't seen that reported anyway. Nobody mentioned it except for here. We're the only place. That's why you're here. That's what we're going to have for you all day, every day. These kinds of things. So it's remarkable in the context of the past and in the same press conference where Kerr goes on and on and on about other things unrelated to China. Some things that he's repeated in the past about his family, that's fine. But answer the questions. Answer the questions. So, but I'm going to get into the China stuff because he also did some gaslighting on China. All right, specifically. We'll get to that in a second. But I want to focus a little bit on Daryl Morey right now and just kind of finish my thought to start. As we're going to talk Daryl Morey today, we're going to talk about his future in such a way that is a deep dive analysis of the situation. We're going to make sense of it for you. You're going to understand what's at stake for him and the Rockets, because the Rockets are a huge part of this. Not the NBA, the Rockets, because they've been separated. And I just told you about the Nike thing, which when I was working on this morning for Twitter and getting ready for the show, that was before Nike came out. And we find out today from Reuters that the Nike store is now pulling Rocket stuff. And this comes after the government in China has told the media to tamp down the criticism. Stop criticizing the NBA. But wait a minute. We're still pulling stuff that's Rockets gear. Are they going to stop embargoing the Rockets when they rescind everything on the NBA in the future, which I'm sure they will? Are the Rockets going to be part of that? Doesn't sound like it to me, especially when you consider a guy like Steve Kerr can't answer a simple question about the status of Morey, whether he thinks he shouldn't be fired or not, right? So, but just want to drill down on this real quick. And I've talked about it all week. Everything in this story has to be viewed through the lens of a totalitarian regime. That's not the way it was when I was in college. That's not the way it was when I was doing my website for Fox Sports. You know, that's not the way it was in 2011. In 2011, China was a very different place. These kinds of things wouldn't be happening, right? The kinds of things that we're seeing in Hong Kong today. Understand, Hong Kong has been under the auspices of the mainland China since 1997. But only now we're seeing some really serious protests, and they're continuing, and they're serious. And they're not about sovereignty, as we're told from China. They're not about sovereignty. They're about specific laws that are inhibiting the basic rights of the citizens of Hong Kong right now. Now, ultimately, right, it's about having a Western situation like they've always had in Hong Kong. But in my research, in my study over the past week, I've seen no indication that anybody in Hong Kong has ever entertained, right, has ever entertained being a sovereign country, breaking away from China, because they know it's not going to happen, especially not right now. So, because you get a dictator in China, that's what he is. He's a dictator, period. So the Daryl Morey situation, that's what we were just talking about, losing the train of thought here. But so you have to look at everything through that lens, right? And now, specifically, China, through state-run media, has demanded an apology from Daryl Morey repeatedly. And of course, they're not going to get it. And at this point, Morey can't even if he wanted to. And these demands for apologies have come from, and I've watched the translated versions with the subtitles, China has a bunch of different media outlets that are posing as legitimate, right? Private companies that are media corporations, but they're really run by China and the government, right? There's several of them. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't take the time to figure it out, you think this was just typical people who are media members opining. Well, they're not. I did the research. I got the background. And what I've been seeing over the past week is, on these television shows, you've got editorials coming from news pundits in China, and they're all talking about an apology from Maury, and it's in print. Okay? It's in print. Apology, apologize. That's what the Chinese government, not the people, the government is demanding. And it's not happening. Right? So keep in mind, the value of the Houston Rockets franchise is $2.2 billion. That's what Tillman Fertitta paid for it recently. The same guy that threw Maury under the bus after Maury's first tweet. 200 million of those $2.2 billion are attributable to China. 200 million. Wow, that's amazing. Is that a little much, you think? No, it's not. And the reason it is China has adopted the Houston Rockets dating back to Yao Ming in the early 2000s. And Yao is now the president of the Chinese Basketball Association, right? That league is joined at the hip with the NBA. And it's a big deal. Some of the teams from that league have been playing NBA teams in preseason games, right? And there have been many NBA stars over the years who've played in that league. Names that you would recognize. The league itself is valuated at $1.2 billion. So each of the teams is worth like $200 million now. This is the Chinese Pro Basketball League. And the chairman of it's Chairman Yao. Yao Ming was named chairman of the league in 2016. Yao Ming came out in a statement. It's the government, but it was attributed to Yao Ming at the beginning of this blow up after the Maury tweet as reporting to the world that his pro basketball league that's joined at the hip with the NBA was going to suspend its relationship with the Houston Rockets. Not the NBA, but the Rockets specifically. His team. That's a pretty big deal. This is specific now. All right? So now you're the owner of the Rockets. This is a $200 million situation in the valuation of your franchise in Houston. Yao Ming, right, has thrown you under the bus. That league has thrown you under the bus. And the worst of it is Tencent, which is the streaming company that streams NBA games to China. It's a Chinese company that's controlled by the government. It is the company that disseminates NBA games into China. They announced earlier this week they're suspending broadcasts of first the Rockets, and then they came out and they said the NBA preseason games, right? We've yet to hear anything subsequent to that. They just said preseason. They didn't say regular season. They're suspending broadcasts, and the preseason's about over. So that's a huge deal because that's a $1.5 billion contract that the NBA has that it shares with all 30 teams. Well, the Rockets were initially singled out as being the team that was going to have its broadcast blocked. Then the NBA as a league was added after Adam Silver refused to apologize for Maury's tweet, right? So that money right there, if the Rockets do not have that suspension rescinded, which I would imagine Tencent is going to broadcast regular season NBA games, but will they broadcast Rockets games And if they don't, what does that mean in terms of the payout of that deal? I'm sure there's a yearly payout from the deal, the $1.5 billion deal that Tencent has with the NBA. That affects the Rockets' bottom line right now. That's cash flow coming into Tillman Fertitta. Now go back to what I first brought up. Right now, it's like, why would I speculate that things are going to be different? I would speculate because, are we going to go to a guest now? Is that what we're going to do? We're going to go to a guest here shortly. I think we're going to have a little football talk for you here in a second. But why would I speculate that the Rockets are different, right, in this situation, right? Because of the apology situation and the fact that they're not going to get an apology from Morey. That ain't happening. And the Chinese government has been left hanging, right? It's been left hanging. And Daryl Morey's name in China has been demonized and trashed by the government. I've said it to you many times. There's no Twitter in China, right? So how did they find out about Daryl Morey's tweet? How did they find out about Daryl Morey? From the Chinese government, which disseminated it through its Chinese version of Twitter that it runs called Weibo, Weibo. That's how they know. And so now he's public enemy number one in China, right? Now it's starting to build up. You're starting to see my point about Daryl Morey's future with the Rockets. As good as he is as a general manager, as great as this team might be, it could be a signature achievement in his career. If you're Tillman Fertitta, you're looking at losing $200 million off the valuation of your team, plus the revenue from the streaming deal if they single you out, plus all the merchandise, because the Rockets are banned throughout the country. Literally now. They've been singled out. Everyone, and remember, or maybe you don't, I don't think we showed this video on the show, but earlier this week, it was probably a propaganda video, but it wasn't portrayed that way. It was this viral video that came out of China where you saw it was in a gym somewhere and they had Rockets logos all over the wall because the Rockets are China's team because of Yao. Well, the guy was painting over the Rockets logo, not a Celtics logo, not a Pacers logo, a Rockets logo. Right? Now, Tillman Fertitta, the owner of the Rockets, has come out specifically in support of Morey. But you got to wonder if all of the suspensions and embargoes and boycotts are rolled back and rescinded with the NBA, but not for the Rockets. And we go forward into the regular season. The Rockets aren't on. They're not streamed anymore. And the ban continues. And the apology is hanging there. And he's not going to apologize. Now you know what I'm talking about. Something's got to give. Of course, Fertitta, if he were to fire Morey, that's a whole nother ball game. So we'll talk more about that coming up. But now we're going to go to Dallas and talk to Jared Sandler, whose coverage of the Dallas Cowboys is brought to you by MyBookie.ag. MyBookie.ag will double your deposit with the code FANCRED, FANCRED. It's Jared Sandler from Dallas. What's up, Jared?
What's up, Brooks? How you doing? I got to admit, I have not brisket sandwich yet, so I failed you.
Holy mackerel.
Try it by the next time. I'm on a college football trip right now with some buddies, and so there's a better than zero chance we eat after midnight, and so that means there's a better than zero chance this weekend I get the brisket sandwich from Subway.
Well, some of those places are 24. But you got to go, when you go to a college football game and it's after midnight, you got to go to a place. It's like, what state are you in?
I'm in Wisconsin right now.
Well, it's a state law in Wisconsin that if you eat a burger after midnight, it has to have French fries on the burger.
All right.
Right?
Well, I don't want to go to jail in Wisconsin. I was also told of this really, really good pizza place near Camp Randall. We're going to Madison to go see the Badgers. There's no allegiance there or anything, but we try to go to a different venue every year. And I've been told it's some great, it's funny. You go to like an NFL game and you ask for recommendations around the stadium. You get like normal pregame stuff. You go to a college game, people want to tell you all about the late night food. And There's apparently a great pizza place near Camp Randall that we'll have to try out, but I'll try and fit in the Subway brisket sandwich, and maybe if it's after midnight, I'll throw some fries on it too.
And we're not getting paid for this. We should be.
No,
though,
we're not.
Right?
We should be.
Right. Testimonial city right here. So this is awesome, though, that you're so you just went up to Wisconsin and you're going to watch the Michigan State game tomorrow. What are some of the other places you guys have picked over the years?
Went to Penn State, Florida State, which I'd say was the I want to say least enjoyable, but that was the year DeAndre Francois got hurt. We got to see Lamar Jackson, but both teams were bad. It was an 11 o'clock start. It just wasn't as fun. We saw Clemson the year they won their first national championship with Deshaun Watson. That was a really cool experience. And we got a bunch of the guys. I went to USC, but a bunch of the guys are SEC. Avoided some of the SEC stops, but I think we're going to head to LSU next year. So we'll start knocking out some of those SEC destinations, but happy to try out Camp Randall. I've heard I've never been to Madison. I've heard Madison is awesome. I heard it's a great scene. So we're looking forward to it.
Now, we're going to be talking about the Cowboys here in a second, and I'm wondering, what's your setup for watching the game over the weekend for the Cowboys?
For this weekend, well, I'll make sure.
Yeah, how are you going to do it?
Yeah, I always arrange my flights around, like when we go on these trips around it. So I'll probably be watching the Cowboys from an airport restaurant in Milwaukee. That's where we're flying out of. So I'll make sure to catch the Cowboys game. Unfortunately, there weren't flights that got me back to Dallas in time, so I'll be heading back to Dallas late so I can watch the Cowboys game with a bunch of other transplants in the great Milwaukee airport restaurant. I don't know. I've spent 2 minutes in the Milwaukee airport, so I shouldn't call it great. But we'll be watching with a bunch of random people in Milwaukee.
So this game to me is really as a disinterested third party, as far as the Cowboys are concerned, against the Eagles. This is the game you want to watch because the narrative, at least my perception of it is, okay, is Dak any good when they play good teams, right? I mean, that's what I've heard, not only this season, but in the past. Can he beat good teams? And, of course, the Eagles represent that. What are your thoughts about this game coming up?
Well, yeah, so, Cowboys-Eagles next week, I think, will be that's the game. It's like a pivot point in the season because the Cowboys have basically been a bully, and you've got to be a bully. You got to beat up on the bad teams, and they've done that, and hopefully – I think there'll be a lot of people who are questioning their existence if the Cowboys don't take care of the Jets this weekend. But, I guess there's always the risk when you look ahead to a game like the Eagles against a lesser opponent like the Jets previously that maybe you're not as sharp. But the Eagles game is such a pivot point for the Cowboys because they've shown they can beat the bad teams, and you've got to do that. You got to be able to win those games to make the playoffs. They've yet to show they can beat a good team, and the Eagles will be their next test and next opportunity to do that. That obviously whenever you're playing a team you're fighting with for a division title against, the game means more than just one win. Tiebreakers and whatnot come into play. So this is a huge game for them. It's at home. They've got to defend the home turf there. One thing that's given them problems is mobile quarterbacks. They haven't been able to finish plays defensively. We saw this against the Packers last week. Aaron Rodgers in the first half bought a lot of time. And same with, Carson Wentz has the ability to do that. He doesn't go down easy. And so that's going to be an interesting challenge for the Cowboys against the Eagles there next week. I
am glad you have confirmed the rumor that the Cowboys actually do have a game this weekend. It's been going around. I saw it on Get Up this morning. There's been speculation. There's rumor to be a team that might be in the NFL. We're not positive. But yes, indeed, the New York Jets take it on the Cowboys this weekend. Thanks a lot for covering me. And
listen, I don't blame you for not really
dialed in.
The Jets, they're pretty bad.
So let's talk about the line from my bookie.
We're on this.
We're going to lose him here for a second.
We're in a tunnel.
I can hear you.
On the Great Milwaukee Highway, but now we're back.
All right. Perfect timing. So we've got the mybookie.ag line. It's minus 7.5 with the Jets. What are your thoughts on the line?
Gosh, the one thing that is keeping me from saying the Cowboys will cover is that it's what you just talked about. I mean, even you just did it. No one who's paying attention to the Jets. They're all paying attention to the Eagles. And I'm
looking ahead.
I see this a lot more maybe in college football. Yeah, you're looking ahead. I'm sure they're looking ahead, but I think the Cowboys cover. They've shown an ability to dominate bad teams. And the Jets are a horrible team. They're a horrible team with a quarterback who turns the ball over. I mean, the Cowboys can't get turnovers on defense, for the life of them. But Sam Darnold loves to throw to the other team. He's got that Brett Favre kind of cavalier disposition back there. Unless Sam Darnold gives the entire Cowboys team mono, which is possible, then I think the Cowboys cover. The Jets can't run the ball. Their offensive line is horrendous. It doesn't seem like they've got a coach who really has a clue what he's doing. In fairness, maybe he just has a horrible roster to work with. But, I think the Cowboys cover this one. I failed you last week. I said they'd cover against the Packers, which, by the way, I understand that the Packers are a good team and whatnot, blah, blah, blah. That's a horrible loss for the Cowboys. To lose at home in such dominant fashion to the Packers, who are playing without Devontae Adams, I don't want to hear any justification from Cowboys fans. Well, Aaron Rodgers owns us, blah, blah, blah. The Packers played great. Yeah, the Packers played great because you allowed them to play great. The Cowboys did everything they could to lose that game. They let the Packers get up early. They prevented the Packers from needing to use their receivers as weapons. They gave the Packers a free pass. That's a horrible loss, and they need to bounce back this week against the Jets, and I think they do. And I think they kind of follow this trend of having an easy
Of course, the
time
X
against
factor
bad
is
teams.
Darnold. So when you look at that over under 44.5, that's something that I would probably myself, maybe even this game in general, but really the over under 44.5 with Darnold coming in there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess what sort of shape is Sam Darnold in? It's, first game action. This is not a guy who's yet to really establish himself in any way. I know he kind of hit a bit of a rhythm last year, never really got that chance this year. I do think ultimately Sam Darnold is a competent quarterback. And hey, I'm a USC guy, so I probably have an inclination to support this guy. I'm still not sold on him. I'm going to go ahead and take the under. I just, even though the Cowboys are weak up front on the D-line without Antoine Woods and Tyrone Crawford and, anyone on the interior who's able to plug holes, this Jets offensive line is so bad. I mean, it doesn't seem like Le'Veon Bell has had any opportunity to get any sort of a crease to do anything. And so I think that, fortunately for the Cowboys, that presents a favorable opportunity to cover up a hole. I do think the Cowboys put some points on the board. I wonder if they get up early, if they call the dogs off just a little bit with Philadelphia ahead next week from a play calling standpoint, from a creativity standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead.
Hey, man, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your vacay. Have a great time, man. A very safe trip, all right? Very safe.
Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks, Jared. That's Jared Sandler of 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, and his appearance with us is brought to you by mybookie.ag. Mybookie.ag. They'll double your deposit if you type in Fancred. MyBookie.ag brings us that great Dallas Cowboys coverage from those guys at the Fan. Of course, we have Mr. Kavanaugh on once in a while, and his dogs, Stompface and Molly. And now, of course, you've got Jared Sandler on board talking about the Subway brisket sandwich, right? Very sheepish coming on the show. I don't blame him. You've got to have that sandwich. Now, if you order the Subway brisket, though, take it from a barbecue expert. Grew up in Kansas City. I know what I'm talking about. No cheese. No cheese. All right. They put cheese on it. When I first went in, I'm one of those guys, if they roll something out and I want to try it, just make it the way you're supposed. The person at Subway, they'll say, well, do you want it on white? I said, just make it the way. It's like, what's the bread? Do I have to do everything? Okay, it's Italian. You're supposed to be making it Italian bread. But that said, tell them no cheese because it doesn't belong on barbecue. I would assume those of you in Texas way ahead of me on that, because Texas, from what I understand, not to say that they don't have good sauce there. Texas is more about the meat, the brisket, all of that. Actually, Clarence Hill Jr., remember him from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, confirmed it. And of course, it's going to be a party in Dallas this weekend with the Red River rivalry. That's between in case you don't know already, the Sooners and the Longhorns. That's going to be a game to watch. we're finally, actually, this is the first weekend where we actually have games. It has been a preseason in college football, at least for everybody but Auburn, with Auburn losing last week to Florida. It's so funny how we contort ourselves trying to sell the product that is football in general. You know, the narrative that always comes out, and take it from somebody who's done talk shows his whole life, and you've got 4 hours and you're looking at a blank call screen and you're thinking about, what am I going to talk about? You've got to sell it, right? You got to think of something. And it's always about, are they a good team against other good teams? Or are they just beating bad teams? That's been the talk about the Patriots. Their schedule has been putrid besides the Bills. So Doug Farrar now of USA Today Sports is going to join us. Celebrated writer in the National Football League. He's an editor for USA Today Sports, an NFL editor. And he's got a book that I've been checking out, man, that you tweeted out, Doug. By the way, Doug, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
But I'm looking at this book, and I wasn't aware of it until I saw you mention it on your feed today. But this genius of, you've got a book out called The Genius of Desperation. It's written with Louis Riddick. Tell us about that book.
It's a schematic history of professional football, going back to the 1920s through Clark Shaughnessy with the Bears, Paul Brown with the Browns, all the way up through Sid Gilman with the AFL, Hank Stram, Bill Walsh. Bill Belichick obviously is a prime innovator today, and it's really everything from the T formation to the RPO.
Wow. So of the stories that you discovered, it's a tough one, but what's the, because I know, because I've been through this and I've done the research and all that stuff before, maybe not on this scale with you and what you're doing. This is a deep dive, but is there one story that just blew you away that you could pick out in your mind and say, wow?
I think the extent to which Clark Shaughnessy was an innovator, I mean, I've been an NFL historian for a long time, and I knew the name and I knew kind of what he did. But this was a guy who, I mean, when George Halas, he was at Chicago University, Shaughnessy was, and George Halas met him at a dinner in 1935 and started talking to him, and actually rearranged the placards at the table so he could sit next to Shaughnessy and get more of his ideas on expanding the T formation and turning it from a thing with 2 or 3 plays to about 20 or 30. And Shaughnessy had all these great ideas to use the man in motion more with the T formation, to make it more of a passing thing. So that offense and the 73-0 1940 NFL championship game, Bears over Redskins, which is the famous one. I believe all of the defensive, it was more defensive touchdowns than anything, but it really was the first modern offense that he created.
Right. Then, and go ahead.
We're not even close to done with Shaughnessy yet.
I want to hear this, because I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated about the handoff from the single wing to the T formation, because you could make the argument. What we're talking about right here, the T formation this might be the most important schematic thing that's ever happened in the history of the league. So go ahead on this.
Shaughnessy offensively took us from the Flintstones to the Jetsons.
Right.
He first did that with what I would call the variable T formation. Then at the same time, he's coaching Stanford at a championship level. So he's working with George Halas as a consultant. And then in the late 40s, he goes to the Rams as an assistant coach. And Dan Reeves, not the same Dan Reeves, but a different Dan Reeves, the Rams owner, starts talking to Shaughnessy. I'm like, okay, I have a head coach. I'm going to fire my head coach and make you the head coach. One of the first things Shaughnessy does in Los Angeles is he takes Crazy Legs Hirsch and moves him from flanker to receiver, essentially creating the 3 receiver set and, in effect, the modern passing offense. Then he goes back to Chicago, and at that point, Red Hickey had brought the shotgun into play. There were 2 or 3 games where nobody could stop it. And it was – the shotgun at that point wasn't – I mean, it was more like a Tebow shotgun. It was, option stuff and different looks and Billy Kilmer running around. And Shaughnessy came back, and Halas said, we've got to stop this. So he took the old middle guard, brought Bill George down and kind of did what Belichick did to McVay in the Super Bowl. We're going to run a 6-1. We're going to just diamond front with an extra guy. But really from the mid-30s through the early 60s, Clark Shaughnessy did as much to create and stop offensive football as anybody in NFL history. And I've probably done 100 different radio shows and talk shows with this book. I mean, I didn't know the whole history of Shaughnessy before I got into the research, and people just don't know his name.
Yeah, it's amazing because what we're talking about is, the very basics of what you're seeing on the field. In that, I'm assuming that he was part of this. Correct me if I'm wrong. He was part of the transition. Maybe he is the guy going from the single wing, which is the pivotal transition, to the T formation, which essentially means we have a quarterback who is designated to go under center, and he's identified as a quarterback that we see today. And that first quarterback was Sid Luckman with the Bears.
Right.
And I know Shaughnessy was in the neighborhood, or what did he play a role in that transition? Because to me, that might be the most important moment in NFL history.
He did. Hallis had something to do with it. Hallis also had an assistant named Ralph Jones who created the numbering system, the gap system. He created an offense, but 0 through 9 has been, it's been credited to Bud Wilkinson and Bum Phillips and all sorts of different people. But Ralph Jones, way back when, early 30s, was the first guy to create a numbering system for the gaps. He and Hallis put together a lot of the sort of the original T. And Shaughnessy came along and said, well, you've got it here. You can do it at this level.
Right. Took it to the next level.
Yep.
Visiting with Doug Farrar of USA Today Sports, NFL editor, and a great book. And by the way, if people want to get this book, what's the best way to get it?
They can get it at Triumph Books. They can get it on Amazon. It's still in bookstores over a year later. It's not on the remainder table yet, thank God. So, yeah.
It's called The Genius of Desperation, the Schematic Innovations That Made the Modern NFL. And this might be like a clunky transition, but when I see the word desperation, it kind of implies competition. It applies doing whatever you have to do to win. And of course, that's the way sports in general, but the NFL is portrayed. It's not political. We're just trying to get the best players to do what we can. Right. The Lions haven't been in the Super Bowl in 100 years. They've been trying to do that. But you see where I'm going. I'm going to Kaepernick here.
Yeah.
And Colin Kaepernick is sitting out there. And I think in The Genius of Desperation, I don't know. Well, first of all, tell me, where did that title come from? Because I'm just off the rails on this.
Well, there were a couple of story arcs for the book. There was the overall chronological. There was the chapter to chapter, because I did the chapters in decades. The 1920 through 1950 was the first chapter. Then the 60s broken up into AFL, NFL, 70s, 80s, 90s, modern. So there was that arc. And then there were the if this, then that moments, the schematic moments in NFL history where the most obvious example is Greg Cook, first overall pick in the 69 AFL draft. Bill Walsh said, Bengals quarterback when Bill Walsh was Paul Brown's offensive coordinator in Cincinnati. Bill Walsh said over and over, Greg Cook could have been the greatest quarterback in NFL history, like Steve Young, but better. And in his, I believe his third game, Jim Lynch of the Chiefs crunches him down, injures his shoulder. It's 1969, so there's no, modern surgery. He tries to play through it, but his career is over. They've done a Sid Gilman vertical offense, 3-digit stuff, based on what they believed Cook would be able to do. So on the fly, Walsh has this backup, Virgil Carter, who had played for the Bears, kind of the Chad Pennington of his era, kind of a noodle arm guy, 5-yard passes and whatnot. And Walsh on the fly has to create what became the West Coast offense, which was timing and rhythm, 3 to 5 step drops, passes to your running backs, a pass is as good as a run, all that stuff. Had Greg Cook stayed healthy, we wouldn't have the West Coast offense. We'd have different iterations of the Sid Gilman, Don Coryell, Mike Martz, 3-digit vert. Walsh had to do something else because he didn't have a choice. He didn't have a guy who could throw a bang eight.
He was desperate.
He was desperate, so he had to come up with something. The Dolphins in 2008, they get just poleaxed in their first couple of games, and on the way back from Arizona to Miami, where the Cardinals just kicked their butts, David Lee, who was the quarterback's coach, told Tony Sparano about this offense he had run with Felix Jones and Darren McFadden the year before when he was Arkansas's offensive coordinator.
Well,
and there is still, I believe, a thing on YouTube where where he explained Steeler power encounter, the 3 plays that the Dolphins used in the Wildcat. And the Wildcat lasted about half a year before everyone figured it out. The Ravens especially had ways to counter it. But that was another example of, we're going to go 0-16 and we're going to be truly horrible. We have to come up with something. And in that third game of the season, they came up with a Wildcat approach, a 3-play approach with pulling guards and different backfield motions that confused the greatest coach in NFL history. Certainly the greatest defensive coach in NFL. They had no answer for it. Couldn't adapt. Patriots could not adapt in game. So really what I wanted to do was create a series of vignettes and stories. We don't have the personnel to beat you. We have to outthink you. We have to think our way out of this box. That was really the genius of desperation. That was sort of the dominant theme of the whole book.
And I think that is a crystallization of what the NFL is missing today, and to an extent has missed for a lot of the history of the NFL. Once we got into the fact that this was a monopoly where the Green Bay Packers didn't necessarily have an incentive to fight for its life. Total desperation. We've got to win, whether it's from the perspective of we're going to go 0-16 or the perspective of we're going to go out of business. I think because of that, when you look at the landscape of the NFL, it's altogether non-competitive with a few exceptions. And so what I was doing was leading the principle of desperation, tying it to it's all about winning. It's all about necessity, a little bit of what your book is underpinned by. And then I bridge it to Kaepernick. Well, if it's all about winning, it's all about the Dolphins not going 0-16. Well, why isn't Kaepernick there? And I think it's a lie. It's not all about winning.
Well, it's always, this as well as I do, it's always been a lie. There was a 13, 14-year period from the 30s to the 40s when black players were not allowed to play in the NFL. And this was in the World War II era when the depletion of talent was massive. I mean, the Steelers and Eagles had to merge at one point just to stay alive. But no, we can't do that.
But there were no black players. But they didn't. They used a guy with one arm, right?
Yeah,
and that was Art Rooney did that.
Perfectly fine. And it wasn't until, and I know you know this, the Rams moved from Cleveland to Los Angeles, and they wanted to use the Coliseum. And the Coliseum, right behind you there, it's a city-owned entity. So they had to go before the city council, and the city council said, well, we noticed that you don't have any black players, and we really like you to correct that before we let you use our stadium. Same thing happened with the Redskins, the last team to integrate in the early 60s, when Melvin Udall, is Kennedy's Secretary of the Interior, threatened that George Preston Marshall, the most overt and disgusting racist in NFL history, we're not letting you use the federal land, a city or state-owned facility in which your team will play unless you integrate. So from 1946 through the early 60s, the only way teams integrated was when there was economic pressure, absolute economic pressure to do so.
Right.
There are no, and with, Sid Gilman was Jewish, so he had experienced pressure. Vince Lombardi was Italian. He had experienced prejudice. He had been told throughout his life that he would never become a head coach because his last name ended in a vowel. So I think, Gilman, Lombardi, Hank Stram, some of the guys in the 60s who had more enlightened opinions and beliefs about black players existing in the NFL to start with and what black players could do. It took a long time for middle linebackers, safeties, quarterbacks, centers, the positions of intelligence. We know that's crap now. It was believed for a long time. We can say that Stram and Gilman and Lombardi were enlightened. They also knew where the talent was. And certainly in the American Football League, which did not have a quota system as the NFL did in the 60s, they couldn't afford to have a quota system. They needed the best players.
They were desperate to compete with the NFL. It was a necessity situation again.
With the established league. So we talk about competitive pressure, which was the case in the AFL. We talk about economic pressure, which was the case with the Rams and with the Redskins. Without that pressure, things don't change. Now, is Colin Kaepernick at this point going to be any better for the Dolphins than Josh Rosen? I don't know. Dolphins have problems all over the place. You look at other teams, say the Jets, say the Steelers at this point, who are starting a UDFA from Sanford. I mean, you and I have each cast this argument in favor of Kaepernick returning to the league. From a competitive standpoint, at any given moment over the last 3 years, Colin Kaepernick has been better than at least 8 to 10 starting quarterbacks in the NFL at any given moment. When injuries hit, as they've hit this season, the number could be higher. Is it ever going to happen? I don't believe so. I think he's out forever. I think it's disgusting. It has made me question why I cover this league at times.
Yeah.
But I sadly think the story's over. I think he's done.
We're visiting with Doug Farrar, of course, USA Today Sports NFL editor, NFL expert, and but there's a couple of things that come to mind, and one of them is it really is astonishing what's happening now, especially with the memo that came out from his agent yesterday, kind of clearing up everything, all of the misperceptions that are out there. But it really makes me believe now that there's some sort of quid pro quo with the president, and that the president came out and gave the all clear. He can sign with the NFL. I don't know if you saw that, Doug, but President Trump did that a while ago. But that was almost
Can we just call him Trump? Can we not put president in his name?
Yeah. Okay, we'll just call him Trump. I'll just call him Trump.
I guess
that's fine. Yeah. But that to me, to be able to get all of these owners together on the same page and do it, I mean, this comes off to me now as direct collusion. And of course, the irony is they just settled a little lawsuit. Maybe it's not ironic. Maybe it makes it easier to do that out of that lawsuit. But another lawsuit could happen now.
Yeah. Kaepernick settled. That's maybe he believed that if he settled, you have a better chance. I think that's, asking Lucy to hold the football down while you kick it. I mean, did NFL owners have a direct connection with Donald Trump to prevent Colin Kaepernick from? I'm not sure that happened. I'm not sure it needed to happen. Mike Freeman of Bleacher Report wrote an article a couple of years ago where he talked to executives, owners, a couple of GMs. This league is so conservative. One guy he talked to said that what Colin Kaepernick had done was worse than what Ray Caruth had done. I mean, just take a second and marinate that.
Right.
There are people, and the pool of money requires that you maintain the league's modus operandi, that we all stay on the same page and the same paradigm. It does not require that you remain competitive. There's no financial requirement in the modern NFL to remain competitive. We've seen that over and over. So whatever impetus there would be to sign Kaepernick to make your team better is far outweighed, crushed by either your own owners, GMs, scouts, head coaches, MAGA beliefs, or the MAGA beliefs of the NFL in general. And you don't want to rock the boat. I mean, it's and it's fascinating that we're talking about this now with what's going on with the NBA in China, because really there are a lot of parallels here. I mean, whenever Roger Goodell is asked about Colin Kaepernick, he has the right to say whatever he wants, and we're not blackballing him, and he has the right to sign with any team. And it's kind of the same filmy stuff Adam Silver is saying. Well, Daryl Morey was the guy who put himself in the figurative line of fire, as Kaepernick did, standing up for his beliefs. And instantly it was, well, he should be fired. And here's Laura Ingraham, Miss Shut Up and Dribble, saying, well, why aren't you being more courageous about? And a lot of this stuff is just predictable. But I find it interesting because sports leagues, well, let's put it this way: if one of the NFL games was over in London, and let's say there was some massive civil rights violation that had Brexit at its core, and that happened while the NFL teams were there. And let's say, hypothetically, it was the Seahawks and the Niners, and Pete Carroll said something about what Britain was doing was wrong, just in an innocuous way, because Pete Carroll is a nice guy and he believes in human rights. Do you think Roger Goodell would handle it any differently than Adam Silver? He'd stutter all over himself. He would overcompensate, then he would undercompensate because he's a ready, fire, aim guy. Sports leagues don't want to be in the business of disseminating political discussion. They want to be in the business of baby Hueying their way around the world and making as much money as they possibly can. The NBA has billions of dollars in China. If they have to sacrifice a Daryl Morey to keep that up, they're going to do it. The NFL has a lot of conservative outposts that make them billions and billions of dollars. And if they have to, take the axe to Colin Kaepernick, okay.
Right.
I don't think any of this needs to be in league with Trump. I just think it's the way it is. Trump is, he's more the effect than the cause. Right.
Visiting with Doug Farrar of USA Today and NFL editor. I think this is the $1 million question in my mind, because it speaks to what we've just been talking about, trying to figure it out. And that is, why does Eric Reed have a job? Kenny Stills have a job? First of all, are they kneeling? They're both kneeling during the anthem, or what's the state of that? It's not even being mentioned right now. I need to look at that.
I think Stills still is, and the Dolphins wanted him out, even though he'd won their human rights.
Stephen Ross jettisoned him, right?
Yeah. As far as the kneeling, Eric Reed, and I don't question Eric Reed's commitment to what he's doing at all. I know he was the one, the thing with Kaepernick's people, he was the one who tweeted it out, and I saw it via him. Whether they're kneeling, I don't know. Are they?
But why do they have jobs? Why do they have jobs, Doug?
Why do they have jobs?
Yeah. Why are they in the NFL and Colin isn't? Is the question. That's the tough one. And I think in the case of Kaepernick, go ahead.
There are people I've talked to who are close to him and close to the situation and close to the NFLPA, who have been frustrated at times with Kaepernick's reticence to speak up when he can, which is, he can speak up anytime, but to be more forward out there. And he's put out a couple of videos of him, warming up. But there are people who would like to see him back in the NFL that I've spoken to, who are frustrated that he's not more vocal about that. And some question, and I don't want to get into the does he want to play football excuse, because that's just one more line of crap. But there is a thought that he's interested so much in social justice. Is he as determined to come back and be in it as he was, as Eric Reed is, as Kenny Stills is? That's one possibility.
So, what I was going to say was, if he was, those guys are both very good players. Mm-hmm. Would you put Colin Kaepernick at their level in terms of ability? Because that would be one possibility. He's not a good enough player. There's a threshold, because Eric Reed's going to talk about the random tests and he's going to be on mm-hmm. Twitter, and they know he's going to be out there, right? Yep. But they're putting up with it because the perception that he's a great player, and he is a great player.
Right.
Kaepernick might not be a good enough player to put up with that stuff. Is that something that could be in play here?
I think Eric Reed's probably a top 15 safety, top 20 safety. I think Kenny Stills is a good 2A, 2B receiver. I think Kaepernick, if you look at it realistically, when he played, I'd say he was, look where Chip Kelly is now. He's almost unhireable in college at this point. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick threw 16 touchdowns and 4 interceptions when Chip Kelly was his offensive play designer and Jeremy Curley was his primary receiver. So we'd have to go back to the Harbaugh years before Harbaugh and Greg Roman said, we want you to stay in the pocket, and it kind of ruined what he was doing. If you take Kaepernick into the modern NFL where there's a lot more backfield motion, there are all these different first and second read RPO concepts. It's designed to make it more favorable for quarterbacks who don't necessarily have an instant second, third, fourth read going. And that's everyone from Baker Mayfield to Gardner Minshew to, name your guy, Kyler Murray, anyone who's come out. The NFL, it's like going from fractions to calculus when you go from college to the NFL. So Colin Kaepernick comes back into an NFL that I believe is more friendly to his style of play. I think skill set wise, he's probably top 20 quarterback in India. I have been supportive of his position and I'm disgusted by the NFL's position, but I'm not going to be unrealistic about it. He's never going to be a top 5 quarterback. There are things he doesn't do well. And
would he be signed? If he was a top 5 guy, would he be signed, Doug?
Is a top 5 guy?
Yeah. Would he be in the NFL right now?
It would be easier. I don't want to say he would be because you and I know the history of this league and the extent, the lengths to which they will go to make sure that people they don't like for their appearance or their beliefs are not in the league. It would make it easier. There are thoughts that he doesn't want to be a backup. Well, he's probably got to be a backup. If the Steelers sign him, he's going to be their starter for the rest of the year. And then whatever happens with Roethlisberger, and if Roethlisberger doesn't come back, they're going to draft somebody. So, is he the long-term starter? Is that a myth? I don't know. But I do know the Seahawks are the only team to give him a legitimate tryout. Would he fit their offense like a glove? So I think it would make it easier if he was top 5. I still don't think it matters because of there's always 5 to 8 quarterbacks at the top of the list. The guys that are just unfungible. We can't win without them. And there's the guys in the middle, and there's 5 to 8 at the bottom. He's better than the 5 to 8 at the bottom in any given year. He's better than at least half the guys in the middle. So whether he's top 5 or top 15, he's shown that he can win as a starter, help your team win as a starter, the most important position in sports. So whether he's top 5 or top 20, how much of an argument is that?
Right. And I guess, the fact that we're having this debate and that I'm sitting here asking and I'm splitting hairs about it. Really speaks to the injustice of it all.
It's a good question. It's a good question. If he had Aaron Rodgers' skill set 5 years ago, would somebody say, hey, I don't care. He can stand on his head for all I care.
Yeah.
Would it be easier? Would somebody break ranks? I don't know. And the fact that I say I don't know tells you how deep it goes.
Yeah.
Would somebody refuse to sign an Aaron Rodgers level quarterback because of his political beliefs? I think the Kaepernick situation tells us that there is no sure answer to that.
But we also, you have to think about canvassing the owners, and you referred to this. There's a lot of conservative owners, but there's some that aren't. But I think about a guy like Shad Khan right now, who is launching this black news channel. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, I do.
But he's invested a bunch of money in it. Yeah, and you would think that he might play a role in this situation in getting Kaepernick to Jacksonville, but obviously not. Maybe that speaks to the peer pressure.
Shad Khan also donated $1 million to Trump.
Oh yeah, you're right. I actually saw him commenting about it now. Right. But I will say, well, I won't say in his defense, but I will say what I saw yesterday was him referring to business. Business has never been better, the economy and all that stuff.
Nuts.
In other words, nothing mattered. It is actually, Doug, you're right. It is nuts. Never mind. It is nuts because Trump's nuts. So, but I want to ask you.
And I don't question. See, if we want to go bigger here for a second, I would prefer not to automatically cast aside anyone who, has a particular political belief. I don't know Shad Khan. I know people who know him. By all accounts, he's a stand-up guy. Okay, fine. I don't really have any reason to disbelieve that. If he wants to spend $1 million to get $100 million in tax cuts, I suppose were I in his position, I would understand his investment more readily, though I wouldn't replicate it. So when we talk about does Trump personify their beliefs, or is it just expedient economically for them to go this way instead of that?
But I do think that we're kind of in an unprecedented situation right now, to say the least. And so what really struck me and what you really, it's a little bit like the China situation. People look at China and they don't know that beginning in 2012, the country changed. A dictator came into power, and now everything goes through the government. And that's a big reason why the NBA is in this situation with Daryl Morey's tweet. It's not a coincidence that this wasn't going on in Hong Kong beginning in 1997 when the handover took place with the British until we've got this new dictator. Now it's happening, and now we get this reaction, right? So, but I think in our particular situation, it's a reflex, it's a default where I said to you something to the effect of, well, Doug, but he was just talking about business. But in this particular extraordinary circumstance, right, that's not good enough because we've got a really, really bad situation in terms of leadership that transcends really everything. At least in my mind, it does.
Well, I think, there's certainly no excuse now. I think the media normalization of Trump's more disgusting tendencies was hard and fast. There was a normalization of Trump and a demonization of Clinton to sort of bring everything to an even level so everyone could sell more newspapers and get higher ratings. So there was, I think, a larger perception at that point of Trump as sort of this weird idiot buffoon guy who would be held in check by the people around him. He wouldn't be the first president to fit that description. And now we realize what it really is. I don't know if there are people who are looking back in horror. I don't really care. If you enabled it, you enabled it. I think a lot of people in and out of the NFL who made that choice, again, we're making it as an investment. I will donate $1 million to his campaign and I'll probably get, 10, 20, 50, 100 million back in tax cuts. And they were right. But what does that mean in the larger sense? Can you, from a conscience standpoint, tie the two things together? It's going to be hard for you to swallow.
Right. When you look at the NBA situation and what's taking place now, I think this is just a general comment that I'm going to make about kind of the state of where we are. We're all signing off on this. I include myself and everybody. But for me, the bottom line is, and I think it really informs Steve Kerr, particularly in the last couple of days, as being disingenuous and patronizing. That one of the reasons I say that, though, is in his deflections, particularly yesterday, he deflects to our government, which is certainly justifiable. That's fine. But guess what? The human rights issue in China was the question, Steve.
Yeah.
That's the question. And the NBA is the United States of America. All right. You can't separate, the government.
No, you can't.
Over in China. And so when you're doing $1 billion deal with China, the highest profile imaginable in front of the people of China, you are legitimizing the dictator oppressing them.
Sure.
And you are playing a direct role in what's happening there. And so it's not just Steve Kerr. Maybe Steve Kerr doesn't realize it. I think that's the issue. I think that we are so, when you look at our president, and he is aware of the president, he talks about it, but we are so detached from reality right now that nobody is, I mean, we're either too pragmatic, you know, we're all bought and sold. You can make that argument. But for this entire discussion to go on, and we're acting like, gee, why aren't they saying anything? Because of what I just told you. Because the more they talk, the more we're going to, wait a minute, this guy's a dictator. And well, hell, we're making him look good. And I don't see a big difference between what the NBA is doing right now and some of the things that maybe Steve Kerr may cite about our foreign policy. That's what really bothers me when he does that, when he deflects. And I don't know if you saw, but we talked about it on the show. He had a quote yesterday where a reporter asked him specifically, do you think Daryl Morey should not be fired for this situation?
Yes,
right, directly, and he wouldn't comment. So it is what it is. I want to ask you one more thing before I let you go, because I know you're a film guy, you're a study guy, and I want to get your thoughts on Baker Mayfield. Is it a function of the offensive line? Is it a function of not having Monken more involved? But what's the real story on him? What do you expect of Baker Mayfield ultimately as a talent?
Well, the thing about Freddie Kitchens, and he came in halfway through the season, and I believe the Browns were 29th in Football Outsiders opponent adjusted metric DVOA in passing offense when Todd Haley and Hugh Jackson were fired. The rest of the season, the Browns had the best passing offense by DVOA in the NFL. I mean, the difference was stark. Now, Freddie Kitchens takes the head coaching job, and you know this. When you become a head coach, calling the offense is like one of 735 things you have to deal with every single day. From you hit the door at 6 a.m. to when you go home at 10 at night or whatever. You're now a CEO. You're not head of programming. You're not head of any department.
You're no longer buddies with Mayfield, right? I mean, like maybe that was that relationship.
That's not even the point. The point is that now Kitchens, who has never been anything higher than a running backs coach before he was named interim offensive coordinator. He's never been an offensive coordinator at any level. He got with Mayfield. They figured out a series of plays that worked really well. And to a larger point, were not figured out. This wasn't the Wildcat where everyone, oh, we've got you. It was a lot of crossing routes. It was a lot of, quick drops, RPO reads, read the box. We're going to run or pass. We're going to get quick crossers over here, quick crossers over there. And it reminded me of one of the first things Sean McVay told Jared Goff when McVay took the job after that disastrous 2016 year. McVay told Goff, you're going to have an open read on almost every play. And you could imagine what that did to Goff after a year of Rob Boris. It's like, oh, thank God. What I'm seeing now from the Browns offense is a lot of really slow developing routes. One of the things I like to do when I'm watching all 22 on Game Pass is I like to stop the drop back, both overhead and in zone cameras. When the quarterback takes his plant step, okay, now he's really, I've got to throw. What do I see? Last year, I saw a lot of open guys underneath. I saw a lot of open guys up top. This year, I'm seeing a lot of receivers who are still trying to beat coverage in their more elongated route concepts. Mayfield's not at a point where he can figure that out. I think he's a good quarterback, but he's just not there. He wasn't asked to do it in college. He wasn't asked to do it last year. And then they just said, boom, here you go into the pot, and you have to process like Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson or Drew Brees. He's not ready for that. I think if I don't want to say simplify, but if they streamline the offense back to what it was last year, and I've written about this at length on Touchdown Wire for USA Today, I think if you streamline the offense back to what it was last year, you're going to be in a lot better shape. I don't blame Mayfield or the offensive line as much as I blame the play design. Now, you can go to other situations like what's wrong with Jared Goff. Well, I think at least 80% of that is Jared Goff.
Really? Well, explain that.
I think he's a fundamentally limited quarterback. And when you have an offensive line that is subpar, your run game isn't working. Teams are not biting on your jet action and your orbit motion anymore, and it's more on your shoulders. I don't know that he's the guy to get that done. And I think over the last calendar year, that's sort of been proven. With Mayfield, I think they've sort of overcorrected to, it's almost like they thought, well, this stuff we did last year worked, but the NFL is going to figure us out. So we're going to zig. And when they thought we were going to zag, we're just going to make everything needlessly complicated and elongated. And the main problem with Cleveland's offense right now is everything is taking too long. And Mayfield is not that guy.
Right. Well, man, this has been great. I really enjoyed it, Doug.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And we got to have you come back and talk some more history too. You know, that was a lot of fun talking geopolitics. We'll actually talk about it, right? Yeah, got to be careful. So,
no, I think if you know anything about me, I'm way.
Oh, I know. Yeah, you're not exactly.
Way past. I passed careful like 3 years ago, and I don't think I can go back.
Yeah, that's why I love following you, man. You are a voice of the wilderness. So thanks a lot, Doug. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's Doug Farrar of USA Today, a touchdown wire at USA Today, the NFL editor there. But he's one of these guys who's a scout, someone watching film. And it's so refreshing to ask him a question like the Baker Mayfield thing. All right, what's the deal? What's going on? And now I can get a real assessment of it because I've heard like 50 different things. That's the problem. It's injuries. It's the offensive line. He's too short, right? There's a million different things. It's the dynamic at offensive coordinator, Todd Monken and Freddie Kitchens, right? There's a conflict there. There's confusion there, right? That's gumming up the works. It sounds like that might be, I should have asked Doug about that, but Todd Monken in that situation, that's a discussion we had with Ken Carman of Cleveland's 92.3 The Fan morning show guy, but he's another Browns expert from Cleveland. We had that discussion with him talking about Baker Mayfield, trying to figure it out. But you got to cut through the noise. There's so much noise in the NFL, to me, with the press, with the media. And the reason is there ain't a whole lot going on between games. There just isn't. So there has to be this sort of sausage factory where they're manufacturing something, right? They're amplifying something. And this has been going on. Don't think that this is new. If you've been around, you probably know, wow, I used to see this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Same thing with talk shows, sports talk shows. Same topics, same subjects. It never changes, right? And it's just people trying to fill the time until we get to the next game. And so they're going to pick things out and make them into something bigger than they are. Of course, the big stories, those aren't reported, like Colin Kaepernick. That's a big story, regardless of what you think or I think. If history matters, if this country matters, if the society that we have today, the diversity of our society matters, then it's a big story. All right. And you can say, and you can put out your animated GIFs of the dead horse guy. You can say that all day, but you're on the wrong side of history. That's a cliche and don't like using that, but you truly are, because this is a big deal, regardless of what the motivation is as to why he's being blackballed. We'll find out someday. You're not going to be able to keep that secret. One of the things in the back of my mind about it is Trump and a quid pro quo to get him a franchise, because of course he's been consumed with that. That's why he's such pals with guys like Robert Kraft of the Patriots. And that's why Trump got into the USFL, because he was getting stonewalled by the NFL. And so all of a sudden now he comes out and says, you just got to put together the timeline in your mind. I mean, Kaepernick has done everything he could possibly do, right, in terms of settling a lawsuit, right? We have the notes from his agent that came out yesterday. Kaepernick's agent came out yesterday and made a list for everybody to see that debunked all of the false bullcrap about why he's not in the NFL. Now, that's not coming from the NFL, by the way. The false narratives, that's the sad part. The people who are saying he's too old, he's been out of the league too long, right? You're not hearing anybody say that on the record. And that's really important. That's a big key. And to me, that's a tip-off that there's collusion going on. All right? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it's obvious why he's not getting starting or why he's not getting signed. But the fact that nobody's talking about it, the fact that, as Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, has pointed out this week, you've got a guy, Devlin Hodges, I think is his name, went to Samford. Now, there's nothing wrong with Samford. Nothing wrong with being from a small school. There's a lot of great quarterbacks that came out of small schools. But that's who the Steelers are starting, right? And the Steelers, to me, they're a prime example. First of all, a legacy franchise, right, in the NFL with a legacy owner who is what? The great-grandson or grandson, actually great-grandson of one of the founders of the league, Art Rooney. And Art Rooney was in on the color line in the NFL. He was the owner of the team. Doug referred to it earlier in the 30s and 40s when the NFL resegregated. Art Rooney was part of that, right? You never hear about that in the retrospectives with all the myth making and slow motion. So the fact that you've got a Pittsburgh Steelers team, I'm reading today. I love this. I don't know if you saw this. I think it was in The Athletic. The Steelers are having these violent confrontations during practice between players on their own team. They're angry and they're upset because they're not winning. Really? Why isn't Kaepernick on that team? Why are you starting this dud or this guy who wasn't drafted and from Samford? Right? You're really upset. And nobody in the league is saying anything amongst the players for the most part. Eric Reed does here and there. But there's a real disconnect with Kaepernick on a lot of different levels. And I think what's interesting about his situation, if you go back to when it first started to happen, right? He didn't have any company. He had a little company on his own team. Eric Reed was part of it. But around the league, he had no support. No support, which makes sense. First of all, in the context of college players don't get paid. NFL players used to be college players, yet they don't say anything to try to help college players. So this is nothing new, you know, and NFL players don't have guaranteed contracts and their next game could be their last game. So in a sense, I guess you can't blame them. But from the very beginning, nobody was, I mean, it was a very muted situation besides Kaepernick. What exploded it into this league-wide protest was Jamel Hill, or actually it was Donald Trump and his comments about Kaepernick. That is what set everybody off. That's what created that spontaneous protesting that went on. It came from the rhetoric of the president, right? So that also speaks to the idea that there's some sort of deal going on right now with the president. And it's funny that we bring up Shad Khan of the Jaguars. And I'm so glad I had Doug on because you, if you were here for our interview that we just had, and we're kind of like dime store psychologist profile of Shad Khan, trying to figure it out because the guy is starting something called the Black News Channel. And he's very, very passionate about it. And he's making the rounds. He's doing media. He's doing interviews. And talk about ironic that maybe it is to me, it might not be to you, but that during the media and publicity that Shad Khan has been doing, the Jaguars owner, this is the Jaguars owner, billionaire, self-made, for the Black News Channel that he's launching, he talks about Trump, right? And how great the economy is and how happy he is with how the president has done a great job with unemployment and whatever. Doug came on just a minute ago and pointed out, and I know I saw this somewhere in the past, but it wasn't top of mind when we were just talking about this, that Shad Khan had donated $1 million to Trump. Now you think about those corporate tax cuts that went on early in the administration. Makes sense, right? It makes sense. And so when you think about somebody like Shad Khan starting the Black News Channel, but also participating in Trump's campaign and likely a beneficiary of that, you place yourself in his shoes, right? And I don't think anybody believes that Trump is cool with Kaepernick coming back, even though he said it. I think that is for historians writing their dissertations 100 years from now. But I just have to believe that there's something going on there that would cause, I mean, these owners, they're never necessarily united on things besides money. So, but when it comes to Kaepernick and his situation, as I said before, my point was he was not embraced by other players initially, right? The outpouring and the league-wide protest, that's been tied to him, right? But he didn't initiate that. And there have been some who have said that his initial protest, the first time he did it during the anthem, was not actually a protest. It was a response from not starting that day for the Niners. So he sat during the anthem. And then he repurposed it the next week because he had lost his starting job. There's that interpretation out there. So as you try to make sense of it, as he was doing this protest from the very beginning, he was not getting support, right? He does have connections to guys like Eric Reed, former teammates, but guys around the league, and you've got non-guaranteed contracts in the NFL. Now, of course, the big problem with the NFL players is they don't recognize that they could solve all of this by striking, going out on strike after the last regular season game for the playoffs. They get paid all their money in game checks each game, right? What if they all walked out, of course, including the playoff teams, after the regular season? The NFL would be screwed big time. They'd have to settle. Why don't the players do it? Good question. Who knows? And I'm sure that idea has been bandied about in the past. So, but you can't just look at the Kaepernick situation at face value, and you also can't necessarily directly connect it to Trump, because Trump, with his rhetoric, right, is what caused the explosion. It may have been focused on Kaepernick, right? That's one thing, but that doesn't necessarily connect the players who subsequently kneeled and Kaepernick himself. In fact, Kaepernick was disconnected from those guys. And by the way, Jamel Hill also played a role in that situation. I gotta look at the timeline. Like, what was the timing of her tweet when she tweeted the white supremacy thing? Because I seem to remember her tweeting right in the middle of that, and the players may have gone out and kneeled after she had the exchange that she did, or maybe it was what she sent the president prompted him to speak. So I got to backtrack in my mind on that. But regardless, it's curious that Eric Reed and Kenny Stills both have jobs. Kenny Stills remains outspoken. And, you know, it's on me right now. I've got to go and look and figure it out. Are these guys kneeling? Can you believe we're not even aware of that? I mean, it's on me, but we talked about it a second ago with Doug. We're like, well, is he still kneeling? Are you kidding me? How could you not know that? We're covering everything else with Eric Reed, and Eric Reed's very outspoken. But here's the thing. we're talking about it. It's great to get this out there and talk about it. It's not a dead horse. It's not a dead horse. But I think in the case of Kaepernick, more than likely, it's not what you think it is as to why things have happened the way they've happened. It's an injustice. And I think my conclusion is he's not a good enough player. I don't think that there's collusion. In the end, I really don't. Because I don't think the owners have the capacity to execute that. So, but I think in the end, if he was a top 5 quarterback talent, he'd be on a team right now. And it probably would have blown over. Probably. I don't know what to make of Trump coming out and talking about it. That's weird. Saying, oh, it's okay now. They can sign him. I don't know why he would do that. But so I did want to go back to Kerr because I talked about this earlier. Cam Smith, our producer, we have this video of Kerr, and we talked about how Kerr, Steve Kerr, the coach of the Warriors, would not answer the question when he was asked by a reporter yesterday, the outspoken Steve Kerr, he would not speak to should Daryl Morey lose his job over what's happened. He refused to respond. And his cop-out was, I don't want to be a soundbite. I don't want to be a headline. It's too late tonight for that. You talk about a cop-out. Absurd, right? Absurd. I mean, the funny part about Steve Kerr's situation is there's been a lot of criticism of it, but it's all generalities. It's all with the NBA, Charlotte. None of it's actually specific. Because if it was specific, it would be legitimate because there are some things that he's saying within his comments. But the people who are criticizing, for the most part, don't even listen to him. They have no idea. They just know he's criticized Trump in the past, gone out of his way to do that. But Cam, do you have the gaslighting clip of Steve Kerr when he was out at practice yesterday taking questions? He was asked this question. Steve Kerr was asked by a reporter. Here's what the reporter said. To continue our geopolitical discussion here, this is the reporter. In all the years you've gone to China, Steve, and the team has gone to China, has it ever come up, the team's business interests in China? Let me finish the question and go ahead and put it up. Or do we have the question in there? I'm not sure. Let me finish the question and then just hit the video. And if it repeats it, that's cool. So here's the question again, because you're going to hear the answer of Steve Kerr in a second. But Steve Kerr is being asked. Oh, actually, I know this is just the answer. So let me do the question. And so when I get done, we'll do it. So the reporter asked Steve Kerr to continue our geopolitical discussion here. And I'm sure he's saying that in a joking tone. In all the years you've gone to China, Steve, and the team has gone to China, has it ever come up that the team's business interests in China are at odds with a country whose human rights record is not in step with the United States? Hit it. Hit the video.
Discussing it, of people asking me about it, people discussing it. No.
That's it.
Nor has our record of human rights abuses come up either. Things that our country needs to look at and resolve, that hasn't come up either. So none of us are perfect, and we all have different issues that we have to get to. And saying that is my right as an American. Doesn't mean that I hate my country. It means I want to address things, right? But people in China didn't ask me about, people owning AR-15s and mowing each other down in a mall. I wasn't asked that question. So we can play this game all we want and go all over the map, and there's this issue and that issue, and The world is a complex place, and there's more gray than black and white.
You got to be kidding me. Hold on to that video. I want to do it again. Let me read the question one more time because I butchered this up. I want to read the question, and then let's hit that video. That's crystal clear, by the way. It looks great. So the question one more time, just so we can grasp the whole thing. You talk about gaslighting, obfuscation, deflection, pathology. To continue our geopolitical discussion here, Steve, the reporter says, in all the years you've gone to China and the team has gone to China, has it ever come up that the team's business interests in China are at odds with a country whose human rights record is not in step with the United States? Here's his answer.
In terms of people asking me, it has not come up in terms of people asking me about it, people discussing it. No. Nor has our record of human rights abuses come up either. Things that our country needs to look at and resolve, that hasn't come up either. So none of us are perfect, and we all have different issues that we have to get to. And saying that is my right as an American. Doesn't mean that I hate my country. It means I want to address things, right? But people in China didn't ask me about, people owning AR-15s and mowing each other down in a mall. I wasn't asked that question. So we can play this game all we want and go all over the map, and, there's this issue and that issue, and the world is a complex place, and there's more gray than black and white.
Talk about playing the game. You just read what he just said, and he's doing what he's describing. And I think the biggest tip-off out of that entire answer is when he says, none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. And then the patronizing comes in. And where is that part? The patronizing part. Let me see. It's, listen to this. Listen to this. The world is a complex place, and there's more gray than black and white. I realize that what's popular these days, because it's new, what's happening, right? Hasn't gone on since the beginning of time, what he's describing. People like him playing a game. I realize that what's popular these days is making it black and white. You're either good or evil. It's convenient to do things that way, but not realistic. Okay, hold on. Things aren't black and white in China? Really? Really? What's happening in China isn't evil? The human rights abuses? What you're doing in your league isn't evil? Enabling it by doing business with China in the highest possible profile, burnishing their image, bolstering the esteem of the Chinese government as they oppress the people of the China? Really? You're not a party to that, Steve, at all. Right? You're not? I mean, it's like the day before. Had he just not commented, I could kind of live with that because I can invent something in my mind that Steve Kerr is actually a good guy, number one, which clearly he's not a good guy. Anybody who would do that, the arrogance there, talking down, condescending, where this is college football. This is Big Ten coach speak. Pat Fitzgerald speak, right? Dabo Sweeney speak right here. Steve Kerr. I actually did. I thought he was better than this. He's not. He's not. And that's actually not the worst part. The worst part is when he was asked by a reporter, quote, the reporter asked specifically, do you believe Daryl Morey shouldn't be fired over something like this? That was the reporter's question. And Kerr came back and said, I appreciate the fact that you have to ask me something like this. I get it. Again, more condescending, patronizing. He's already deflecting. You know it's coming. But I'd hope that you'd listen how he couches this. He lards up the answer to obscure it. The cowardice that's he's got to wrap it all up in something so you can't really detect it. Okay, what did he just say? Oh, it wasn't that bad. No, it's bad. He says, this is Kerr, quote, I appreciate the fact that you have to ask me something like this. I get it. But I'd hope you'd appreciate my right. It's his right. As if we're saying, Steve, it's not your right. Is that what we were saying? Is that what we were claiming? Why are you asking or answering a question that wasn't asked, Steve? Right? He says, I'd hope you'd appreciate my right to not answer that question because all it does is create a headline and a soundbite like everything else you do, Steve. What do you think we're doing right now? That's your job. That's what you do specifically as a coach. You are a soundbite. That's a big part of the job, right? How about that? What if he didn't talk to the press? What if he didn't provide sound bites? He is denigrating the whole concept of something that gets him paid and creates the NBA as we understand it, because without the sound bite, without the headline, Steve, you're fired. You're out of business. There is no NBA without the media, period. Period. So he ends it with, because all it does is create a headline and a soundbite. I choose not to be a soundbite tonight. It's probably too late for that tonight. I choose not to be that soundbite. It's so you can see in his mind's eye when he says probably too late for that tonight. He knows what he's doing. And that he truly is throwing Morey under the bus. Now, he may not like Morey. He may think Morey should be fired. He might think that. He might believe it. He might hate him. And that might be why he's not saying anything, but doesn't matter. So, and it's it just, what's funny about the Kerr thing in particular, more so than Popovich, I haven't watched enough of Popovich in action. But Kerr particularly, 2 days ago, when he was asked about this stuff, he said no comment. And he did exactly what you just saw. Remember how he just said no when they asked him about, by the way, and the Cam, the clip that you just put up, what's hilarious about that question, talk about killing the question, or I shouldn't say killing, a pointless question, is asking Steve Kerr, hey, when you were in China and all those cameras were around all the time and you had Chinese government minders all over the place, some of whom you didn't even know were minders, were people asking you about civil rights abuses or human rights abuses in China? Was that going on, Steve? No kidding. It wasn't. Right. Why would you ask that question? But to me, that underlines a fundamental principle of this whole situation. The media is clueless. You're completely detaching reality from your reporting. You're acting like this is the Pacers and the Bulls, and something happened at a coffee shop or something, some sort of controversy, whatever it is. Something happened on Twitter here in the States. It happens all the time, right? It's not like that. It just isn't. as bad as it is here, it is bad actually, but it's a surveillance state. And the idea that someone in China is going to ask him about, human rights, and even if they had, right, that's a pretty serious thing to get into. If you're a Chinese citizen with Steve Kerr, even if they had, do you think that's something that Steve Kerr, oh yeah, let me hold forth about how someone in China, let me give you their name and address, right? They told me all about the concentration camps. Of course. No, it's an absurd question. It's an absurd sequence. But what does he do? He gives you the no. And in absence of another, there's no other questions. The guy that says, I don't want to be a soundbite, in the same sequence of questions, the same setting, the same sitting. What I just read you when he said, I don't want to be a soundbite, the guy you just watched, where he's asked the question, ridiculous question that lets him off the hook, and he says, no. And then he keeps talking. But he doesn't want to be a soundbite, right? He doesn't want you to quote him. He doesn't want to have this platform and just blather on and feel really important. No. Yes. It's exactly what he's doing. And so, listen, I'm seeing a guy like Ted Cruz. I don't know if you saw this today, but Ted Cruz wants to hold hearings now on this. And of course, he's going public and inviting Adam Silver to come on down to Capitol Hill. Ted Cruz doing it publicly. All right. He really wants to make it happen, doesn't he? I'm sure Adam Silver's going to throw in with you on that right as the season's starting, right when they get back. Because you have the best of intentions, not just about an opportunity, not just about publicity. If they were to have those hearings, they might. What are the questions going to be? I'll guarantee you the questions are going to be focused and centered on the number one criticism I've heard people leveling at the NBA over the past week. Right? What's the criticism of the NBA? What's the criticism? Has nothing to do with what we just talked about. The legitimate criticism. What we're criticizing Steve Kerr for, completely legitimate. The guy's an empty vessel and he's a coward. He is not what he portrays himself as. He just isn't. And he can't even bring himself just to not comment. I would have no problem if nobody in the NFL right now, or NBA, was doing any media until they got back or something. I would have less of a problem than what he's saying. But that's not the criticism that's out there. No, it's all about Charlotte. Yeah, let's dig up Pat McCrory. Well, they did dig him up. And he's in the media reports addressing the situation, right? That's what we're looking for. So all of the criticism is couched in, look what they did with politics in Charlotte. Right? Look what they put us through. They embarrassed us. Right? Of course, the implication is LGBTQ is crap. It's baloney. Whatever. That's part of why people are bringing it up. That's some of the underlying motivation. That said, so it's all about the fact that that took place, and now nothing. Not saying a word over there, right? Because they did it over here. And now they won't stand up for American values. They won't defend a freedom fighter like Daryl Morey, right? That's what the whole discussion is about. It's not about drilling down on what's important, which is the NBA's business in China. That's what's important. That shouldn't be there. That should not be enabling the government, bolstering the government's power and authority to oppress the people. That's the issue. But that's not going to be the criticism because everybody's doing it, right? Instead, We're going to grasp onto this LGBTQ issue, right? And it happened over in North Carolina. And we're going to strike upon that as the center of our criticism. We've been, you know what? We've been waiting. We've been waiting to use that on you. And of course, Adam Silver defied the Chinese government, which he did 2 days ago, and said, I'm not apologizing. He said that on camera in Japan to the Chinese, knowing he was going to be in China the next day. That's what led to all of the shutdown of the advertising and the media. It was because Adam Silver actually did the right thing. For once, a little bit too late, way too late. The damage had been done. Daryl Morey's career in Houston's probably done at some point soon. And he said, I support Daryl Morey's freedom of speech and expression. Great. Right? Nobody brings that up, though, as they're criticizing the NBA. That actually didn't happen. There's a rumor it happened. Or no, it actually did. Okay? So you can see, people already have their set plan, their set piece on how they're going to approach this. And they can't wait to get back at Popovich and Kerr. Forget about what they're actually saying right now, right? Let's go back to Charlotte. But look at the criticism for the most part. Now, of course, Beto and AOC have criticized as well. And to AOC's credit, her criticism entailed demanding the NBA get out of China, which is great. That's actually the correct approach. It's ridiculous and unrealistic to do it in an open letter and sign it, with all these other people who don't necessarily share what your aim is with that letter. And I'm not saying that she's pure in her aim, right? But at the very least, that's the issue. And it's not the last thing people are talking about, the NBA being in China and enabling that government to do what it's doing in part. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the NBA is a driving force behind the concentration camps. That's not what I'm saying, right? But that's not the last thing people are talking about. It's not being talked about. So, and that frames all of my criticism of Steve Kerr. That's where I'm coming from. And I'm not coming from Hong Kong. I'm not coming from Hong Kong. The people of Hong Kong have to do what they have to do to maintain their basic freedoms. They're doing it right now, and we've made it much worse on them, much worse, unfortunately. And it wasn't just Daryl Morey, that's for sure. But it stems from a lack of understanding of what's going on. That's the whole theme of this entire show. So, and what we do every day, pretty much, trying to cut through the noise. So we want to thank Jared Sandler of Dallas's 105.3 The Fan, the MyBookie.ag Dallas Cowboys coverage. Go to MyBookie.ag, type in the letters Fancred, and they'll double your deposit at MyBookie.ag. We also had a great discussion, one of our better interviews, with Doug Farrar, touchdown wire at USA Today, NFL editor at USA Today Sports. And he's the author of that book with Louis Riddick. You know him from ESPN, The Genius of Desperation. Great interview. We got some amazing guests coming up next week. And we're going to be leading on stories. We're going to be talking about things nobody else has been talking about, contemplating, pondering, bringing people in on current events, NFL, college football, NBA. We've got some very special NBA people coming up next week, more than one. All right, some of the top people in the business, the aces of the NBA media, just like the way we do NFL, all right? That's all coming up next week. So as a reminder, we're on every weekday here from Los Angeles, Monday through Friday, starting at noon Eastern time. And so for our producer, Cam Smith in Boston, I'm Brooks Melchior saying so long from Los Angeles. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.